Welcome to Behind the SME, the podcast where we dive into the stories of founders, leaders, and visionaries of small and medium-sized enterprises. As the CEO of a small business myself, I want to uncover what drives the success of SMEs by talking to those who are in the trenches, building their businesses from the ground up. I hope you enjoy the episode. Sage, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me, Adam.
It's good to have you here. So, for context for our listeners, Sage and I worked together for 5 and a bit years.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So Sage is the COO of Kene Partners, my firm, and I wanted to have her on because the podcast is all about helping businesses operate better, and Sage is one of the best operators in the business. Also one of the most humble, so isn't going to admit it. But Sage has an unbelievable set of insights, I believe, for anybody that's running a small business, and has a really amazing approach. And so I thought it was a good time to bring her into the podcast. But let's rewind a little bit, Sage, and let's give everyone a bit of context about who you are, your early career, and I guess what led you to Kene Partners.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Adam. So I've been with Kene Partners for 5.5 years, as you said. I started off a long time ago in corporate tax. My background is tax, corporate tax, and a little bit of legals as well. I started off with the Big Four, really enjoyed it, lots of structure, frameworks. And then as I progressed in my career, I wanted to do other things. So I joined a few startups, SMEs along the way, boutique tax consultancies, kind of honing my skills, my expertise along the way. And then one day I just wanted to do something different, still in the tax space, but actually helping SMEs to access sort of the funding landscape that is available, but doing it in a positive way. And this is where I met you. Many years ago.
Many years ago. Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, I remember the interview very, very well. And tell us about your journey within the business.
Yes. So I started off in the consulting team. So that's a specific team that works with SMEs, MDs, FDs, and really understands the business. And we work out how we can access government incentives for them, specifically the R&D tax incentive. It's very rewarding for them, enables them to grow, innovate. So it's really impactful for them. So I started off in the team as a manager. I eventually moved to lead the team a few years later. Large team of 20 at that point, mixture of tax professionals, engineers, legal minds. And then I took on the COO role in February 2024 this year.
Yeah, so I think maybe not the most typical route to COO,
No.
but and I remember sitting down with you and explaining that I thought it was the perfect role for you, and then we went through what it would entail.
Yes.
And you went, yeah, that does sound like the perfect role for me.
Yes.
Let's talk about COO as a role generally, because there will be a lot of small businesses out there that maybe don't have a COO.
Yeah.
And they've heard the phrase, maybe think it's for larger organizations. Tell us a little bit about what you think a COO should bring to the party.
Yes. If I just dial it back a bit, I think for me, the reason why it works so well is because I grew up with Kene Partners. I understand how the business works, it operates, its challenges. So naturally what I was doing is always trying to find quicker ways to do things, focus on productivity, structure within the consulting team. And I think working with a like-minded COO is really helpful, because what you're trying to do is, they're very good at the vision, the brand, the external side of things, but you're trying to bring that into the business. And how do you emulate what they want, but within a structure, frameworks, productivity, efficiency angle? So I think for the COO, it's very unique for each SME. They can be quite vital because they help the operational efficiencies of the business, cross-team collaboration, functional, talking to each other, I think is really important, but they really understand the crux of the business. So they can take that vision and go with it.
Yeah, and we're going to get into a bit of detail on actually what that means from a day to day. But I guess maybe my perspective the CEO seat, the CEOs often have lots of wild ideas.
Yes.
They want to do things. They want to move things forward. Maybe, and I'm speaking for myself more than others perhaps, but maybe not the best implementers. They can take it from 0 to 3, but maybe not from 3 to 10.
Yes.
And there's actually some really good literature about this.
Yes.
There's a book called Traction, which talks about the perfect pairing being a visionary and a executor,
Yes.
an implementer.
Yes.
And I'm not for one second saying that I'm a visionary, but having that complementary skill set where you have someone that goes, hey, look, I recognize this. I've had this conversation with this client. I think there's an opportunity here, to then actually bring it to life. I think it is a different skill set.
Yes.
And I would suggest a really good COO is the glue that holds the business together. If there's a hiring need, they go, let me execute on that. If there's a process improvement that needs to be done, let's get after that.
Yes.
If there's cross-departmental project which needs to be worked on, normally they're going to be the one steering that. And they've just got hands-on with what's going on in the business and the strategy, and they just connect everything up really, really nicely.
Yes.
So yeah, if you're feeling in your business like there's a disconnect between ideas and execution, maybe a COO is a good solution, would you say?
Yeah, you summed it up really well, because I can talk quite candidly. We work together and we do complement each other. You'll come up with these great ideas. I often need to sit back and think about how we can execute and implement them. I think about the day-to-day, and then I also have to future-proof those ideas as well. So you're right, it is a connection between the two.
So let's talk about the practicalities of all of this, right? How does one approach a role like yours? Obviously, it is very varied. What do you do, and on your day-to-day basis, how are you approaching things?
So if we could start off, possibly taking on a new team, for example, because that's what I do. So I look at what the team needs. So I apply a framework. I think management has changed over the last 10, 20 years. It's gone from quite hierarchical to modern, focus on performance and results. So I try and use a framework of guidance, which is a mix of direction, clarity, and feedback. Also how we build the team, foundations of trust, and then move on to results, setting expectations. So before I can do any of that, I have to get to know the team. I have to understand what makes them tick. They've got the skill sets to do the job, but perhaps I need to figure out what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what gaps are in their skill sets, really get to know them. I like to listen to them. Non-verbal cues are really important to me. What they're not saying, I think I can tell a lot from that. And get to know the team. And I look at what we need to harness from that team and the talents from that team. And then I start off possibly with some direction. So if it's a new team, tactically strat sessions, early on, workshops, what went well, what didn't go well, what do they want, what's missing. And we sort of break that down. We look at the vision for the company and how we can create a vision for the team. It gives them a North Star. We use that term a lot at Kene. It's a guiding force, but also helps you keep on track. And I think the vision needs to align back to the company's objectives and goals. And then what we do is build roadmaps, put structures, put frameworks in, and really identify the key roles and responsibilities. Because if a person knows what they're meant to do and what's expected of them, they can actually proceed quite well. And I'd like to focus on sort of something called psychological safety. I read a book a long time ago, Inside Job. I can't remember the author, but what it talks about is you can give your team goals, meaningful work, objectives, but they need a foundation of security where they can actually test new ideas, test new skills, push their boundaries without negative sort of consequences. So that's what we try and do. And that's the direction part. Feedback is really key. It's very important at Kene Partners, something that you have encouraged from the beginning. Informal, timely feedback is really important. We've got a model that we use. I can talk to you about it later. But feedback is also about positives, but also framing it in a way that the negatives can also be improved as well. The objective is improvement, not focusing on the mistakes.
Yeah.
Seek out what went wrong, but then rectify and redirect them as well. So that's a direction piece.
Yeah, super interesting. So there's a few topics I want to explore here.
Sure.
One being how you manage to give that team, the teams that you look after, a sense of autonomy.
Yes.
Where they own the successes and the failures.
Yes.
They have the ability to innovate.
Yes.
But it's done in alignment with the broader company's ambition and mission.
Yes.
So it sounds like that strategy session at the beginning is a really important part of that journey, right? You have a moment in time where you can say, you know, here's the vision, here's what we want to do over the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years. Yes. What is this team's part to play in that? How do you contribute to that? What do you think you can add to that?
Yeah.
Really high level conversation. Then you bring it into, okay, what are the projects that are contributing? How do we track ourselves? What are the KPIs?
Yes.
And then do you then also go, let's book in a catch up in 6 months to see how we're achieving against these and what's changed? How does the ongoing maintenance work?
So then I work on like building the team. So I kind of make sure that we've got some direction and clarity there. Then I work on team building, and underpinning that is trust. I think when there's trust, teams are empowered and more motivated. So how do I build trust in? And these are some of the techniques we use. I quite like flat structures. We're all equal. So create an environment where actually they can say what they want and speak up. Very clear communications, direct, transparent communications, giving them the why, giving them the detail that they need to do the job, bringing them as part of the decision-making process, explain why decisions are made. What we also do a lot is have weekly meetings, for example, where, we'll have an agenda, we'll have a chair, but we mix it up and everyone contributes to that. I want to create an environment where they all are part of the debate. I want to hear their voices. They feel they can contribute. And I also like to notice people that are not contributing as well. I want to bring them on the journey. They're part of the decision-making process.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of that. Also, one-on-ones are really super important. Reason being because you're focusing on that individual. So you want to see what their progress updates are, what challenges they're facing, what's in their way, what can I take out of their way, what's the noise. So tasks that don't need to be done, or help prioritize, or maybe adapt and readjust what's on their plate. So we do a lot of that. But in the form work, making sure the communication is really important. As I talked about, we build in psychological safety and want them to feel free that they can say what they want without negative influence as well.
That let's pick up on the weekly meetings topic for a moment, because something that you do really well is a shared agenda. So you very rightly will not have a meeting unless there's an agenda.
Yes.
Because you're a busy person and you don't want to waste your time. So you use a shared page, don't you, with your team?
Yes.
And there's a calendar date with your regular meetings in, and you can go and contribute a discussion point to that calendar.
Yes.
And what do you think that does for a team? As someone in your team, what does that encourage them to do you think?
It helps. It encourages responsibility. It's ownership of work. As part of the team process, delegation is super important. Often managers don't often like delegating because they want to keep the project, or their fear of failure or whatever. So as part of that, we're delegating responsibilities. I think it's a practice of trust. So that agenda is all about what they own, their responsibility, coming up with some solutions. It gives them autonomy over that. And if they've got problems, they can add onto the agenda and we can discuss it and help clear the noise for them. It gives structure, but accountability as well.
Yeah. You mentioned something earlier that raised a memory of a conversation that we had a couple of years back. So in our company, there's a couple of client-facing teams, and then there's 4 or 5 non-client-facing teams. And I remember us having a conversation about how we make sure that we don't have a hierarchy of importance of teams. And it would be quite easy to say those that are on the front line interfacing with clients are more important than those that aren't on the front line and interfacing with clients, when actually fundamentally that isn't and shouldn't be the case. And I remember having a conversation with you about how do we make sure that the largest team that makes the most noise and has revenue attributed to them don't get prioritized in every interaction. And so we did things like share the chairing of leadership team meetings across everybody, and it was an equal share. When we did reporting of monthly results, it wasn't always let's start with the biggest team and the revenue generating teams and then move to the other teams, but actually, we'll keep the mix going. And the way we remunerate and reward and recognize all goes into that. Really interesting. And I think if for listeners out there that maybe that might resonate with, have a think about what it might feel like to be in what is in their business perhaps deemed as a second tier team, and actually what that might do to their motivation, impact their motivation.
That's right, because everyone has a role to play and they have a responsibility within the team. They're all contributing to the larger objectives, the strategy, the goals. They need to feel motivated and empowered, and they need to feel like they're doing meaningful work as well. So you have to prioritize each team, their efforts, their achievements, and recognize them in all the forms of mediums that you have, whether it's teams, daily meetings, monthly reporting, town halls that we do as well. We have quarterly town halls at Kene where each team can stand up, and we mix that up too. Contributors from different teams will talk about their updates, their projects, how they've impacted the goals. Everything goes back to the strategy and the goals. Everyone feels like they've contributed something to that.
Yeah. You mentioned one-to-ones.
Yes.
We've all had and probably held on being on the receiving end of one-to-ones, some more effective than others. How do you lead a killer one-to-one?
Killer one-to-one. Back to some frameworks, I think for me is really important. I look at an agenda, ensure that it is covering that person. So whoever I'm having one-to-one, I really want to understand them, what drives, what motivates them, what's their mindset, and I build a one-to-one around that. For some individuals I have in the team, well-being is really important. We focus on that. For some individuals, performance, mindset, I want challenges, we will focus on that. So for some individuals, it's organization and prioritization. Like they may have so many things on the go, it's making them feel anxious and stressed. I come in and I adapt their priorities and their workload. So I mix it up because I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing for the team member, not for the agenda of, the wider purpose.
Yeah. And have you ever gone into a one-to-one with an agenda in mind, the person that you're sat in front of, the state they're in, the challenges they're facing, be it positive or negative, means that the current agenda is completely null and void, and so you have to change it.
You have to have agility in this. You have to iterate, and also listening is really important. So often in one-to-ones, I'll go in and active listening, seeing what they're saying, verbal cues, non-verbal cues we talked about. Sometimes I do something called loud listening. So I'll listen, observe, and then I'll notice they'll say something and I try and clarify that point as well. I let them lead as well in sessions, decide what they want to talk about as well, because it's important that they feel empowered to say what they want. But sometimes they may not want to say something, and how do I draw that out of them is what I also focus on.
Should we share a framework? I've got one.
Yes.
Should I go first?
Yes, you go first.
Okay, so I have this lovely framework that it's really simple.
Yes.
It's called the PME triangle:
yes.
physical, mental, and emotional.
Yes.
And it's based on a theory that there are potentially 3 categories of things that might affect someone's performance.
Yes.
Be it their physical state,
yes.
their mental state, or their emotional state.
Yes.
Physical state being, are they tired? Are they looking after themselves? Are they unwell? Their mental ability being their capability to do the job. Is there actual technical gaps in their knowledge that's stopping them from doing the role to the best of their ability? And the emotional state being in the work context, their motivation.
Yes.
Right. And the linkage of maybe what's going on in external life to what's going on within the business, and what are their goals, their mindset, etc. And obviously an individual can have, be very strong in an area and weak in 2 others, or weak across all 3 or whatever. But I've always found it quite useful to compartmentalize the 3 issues and say, look, you know how to do the job because you've done it historically. Mentally, I think you're in a really good spot. The goals are really strong, and your motivation is really good.
Yes.
But I think performance is lacking because you're not looking after yourself, and therefore you're turning up to work in the wrong physical state.
Yes.
And actually sometimes that framework can be really, really helpful. Your turn.
Mine. Slightly different.
Go on.
But I like it. I look at kind of what kind of person they are. So, in the businesses, we can have superstars, rock stars, high achievers, people in, the middle, and then low performers. So I kind of look at what camp they're in. And then if it's a superstar, I need to look at, they could be in the right role. They may have all the skills they need, but what is in their way that could stop them, So we build an agenda around that. So, what do they need to do? Do they need more space to harness their skill set? Do they need more space to talk about ideas and just go for it? What kind of productive work environment works for them? Do they want more autonomy? So I kind of build an agenda and a framework around that. But it is similar. It is about their kind of personal goals, their company goals, and what they need as well, and what I can take out of their way. Also, how they like to be recognized. So at that point, we'll do some feedback, whether they want to be recognized in, a shout out or a win, or we talk a little bit about that. It's very important for them. High achievers, they're slightly different, right? Very goal orientated, very focused, constantly moving forward, very motivated. So build an agenda around how I can get the most out of them as well. So that could be, what skills do they want to learn? What progression do they need? What challenges do they want? How do we mix it up a little bit? Also, what's their own self-operating system? So we talk a bit about their, like you talked about, their sort of personal life. But what do they do pre and post work to get them into that mindset? And then progress updates. So it's very unique to them. Then we've got the middle, as I like to call, they come to work, they enjoy what they do, but how do I get the most out of them? So they have much more of a sort of structured framework. Well-being is very important. We look at, but then we talk about projects and updates. What do they need to do to keep on track? How do they need to kind of readjust something? What training do they need? What support do they need? What resources? And what sort of systems do they need? So any tools, any, CRM systems or project management tools, what do they need to just get to that little bit of level? So I adapt it accordingly.
Yeah. Let's talk about feedback.
Yes.
How do you encourage honest feedback, constructive feedback, and in what forum would be most appropriate?
I found this quite challenging to do, because I think sometimes with feedback, you think you always have to give negative feedback, and how do you do that? We had a leadership coach come and teach us actually how to give feedback, and I really like this model. It's something called example, effect, silence, and change. And with that model is you can give all sorts of feedback. So first of all, feedback, good feedback is really good. Praise your team, because they feel fulfilled when they get praise. It's meaningful to them. So that's really important. You can give that how you want to. But sometimes giving feedback is, you want to change some behaviors or adjustments. So give the example of something factual. I try not to use emotion, judgment, sentiment. So an example could be, an individual was meant to give me a piece of work on a certain day at a certain time. I didn't get it. That's the example. And then we talk about the effect, but the effect has on me, not them. Because they can't challenge that, because it's the effect on me. So this is why I can give some negative. I can frame the negative, and I can say, look, the effect of not getting that piece on time meant that I pushed back a one-to-one, I pushed back a client meeting, I'm now behind on my work, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. And then that person kind of thinks about it and thinks, okay, hang on a minute, my actions didn't bring out the best. How do I change? And they come up with a solution. Could be that I've managed expectations, or they put something in my diary a little bit earlier, but incremental positive improvements is where I'm getting at. I've used that model in all scenarios. For me, it really works. Encourage it both ways as well. I want to seek that feedback from the team as well.
So you use that in a negative and a positive, for negative and positive feedback?
I use it for all sorts as
and I'm a member of your team. How often do you think am I getting feedback?
I'll do it all the time.
Really?
Informal, regular. If something is happening in a meeting, it's not so impactful for the team, I'll do it at that point. But on my one-to-ones, I'll write a little note in my agenda, I add that in. I like it informal. I like it timely. I don't want to wait for a week or two, because that incremental change, if you did it earlier, performance will increase.
Yeah.
If you wait, habits set in.
Yeah, it loses its power as well.
Yeah.
Let's talk about high performance real quick. So I don't know if it's unique, but we do something interesting here where we take high performers that, maybe let's take business development, right? Because it's an easy example. It's quite numerical. I think a lot of firms take a high-performing business developer and they've got a couple of years, 3 or 4 years worth of exceeding targets. And it's very easy to then funnel that person down the leadership route.
Yes.
You think if you are exceptional, therefore you're going to create a team of exceptional people.
Yes.
And I've seen it too many times where that person gets into a management role with all the things that a management role might entail, and their personal performance drops off. And as their personal performance drops off, they hit a bit of a downward spiral. Maybe their confidence diminishes. They get less enjoyment from the role, and therefore they transfer that to the people that are in their team.
Yes.
And the team don't do so well either. Yes. And it's just one big negative cycle. And, that might resonate with a lot of people. There is an alternative, though. Talk us through the alternative that we designed and implemented.
Yes. So there is the alternative actually is a specialist route or a high performing route. It's where you recognize the strengths of that individual. You talk to them about their strengths, what they want to achieve. And actually they create a path that's based on their strengths. So it could be, for example, your example is a salesperson, but in my example, I can give a technical individual. They actually want to focus on their technical expertise. They're good at that. They want to make high impact. When you're technical and you have expertise, you can really make high impact quite quickly. They may not want to people manage. It may not be that they've learned, or actually managing people is quite a challenge. It's a practice. Leadership is about influence, and you can only get there if you've got practice at doing that. Suddenly you change their shift from somebody that's very technical, works in a certain way, structured, wants to achieve results, to shifting their trajectory completely. They then don't feel comfortable. But if they think that's the only route to progression, they will keep trying. And actually, it's not setting them up for success. So what we've done at Kene is create different routes for progression. Make it known that it's okay, actually. If you want to focus on technical side of things, be a high performer, get the results, get your targets, just focus on that. We'll clear the noise for you. We'll support you on your progression. But it is well known. Or you can focus on managing teams, leading teams, developing teams, be less hands-on, but your performance is going to be measured on the success of that team. You create hybrid models too. You can do a bit of both as well.
Yeah, and it's been amazing for us, hasn't it? Really, because there are only so many management positions. You do get the chance to, I guess, really glamorize that other route and saying earning potential is the same, if not greater. You get to the control. I remember a very vivid example of this where this was a high-performing individual that said they wanted a leadership position, but the kind of the traits that they'd shown me before told me that maybe they thought they wanted it, but actually not necessarily. It was the right thing for them. And I remember sitting down and going through the bullet points for the role plan and saying, there's weekly one-to-ones with the members of your team, and then there's monthly reporting to the board, and there's performance management processes to design and a training structure to design and implement. And you'd have to be involved in hiring and some of the strategy, and then there's the budget work, and it started at the top of this list that was maybe 20 bullet points long, and by the end they turned to me and said, I don't think I want to be a leader. And I think I want to focus on what I do best. And it was one of those lovely instances. But I think real thought is needed on what the alternative route looks like. And I think society and general kind of success more broadly can be determined by progression and taking leadership titles in X and Y and Z. And it needs to be really purposeful to show that the other route is as interesting and enticing and rewarding and more beneficial for a lot of people.
Yes. Yeah. Businesses need quality leaders and quality teammates. And I think you need to have both routes. You're spot on about the leadership part, because it's actually quite challenging. You have to make decisions constantly. You have to think about the team. You have to think about strategy. You have to want to do that, and showcasing what it actually means is really important for a person when they want to consider both avenues.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take a low performing individual in your team.
Yes.
How are you approaching that person? What would you do? First steps?
We talked about it a little bit. Get to know them. I really want to understand what motivates them, what drives them. Is there anything in their outside life, personal life, something? Is anything bothering them? I think it's important to figure that out. I want them to start to trust me, because when they trust, they open up. I really want to understand them, and then I want to break it down for them. Like, set some really straightforward, simple goals so they can feel that they're accomplishing something. Give them a lot of support if they want it. Give them some training if they need it. Do they need any more guidance from different teams? So we break it down. We have more sort of structured one-on-ones more regularly. I check in with them as well. But I want to see incremental movements. I don't want to give them too much so they feel overwhelmed, but I want to make sure they've got the support needed. But very clear goals, very clear what's expected of them, what they can expect from me is important as well. And then really see if they're in the right role as well, because they may not be in the right role where they're excelling as well. So let's think about their role and their positioning within the team as well.
I want to change tack.
Yes.
Let's talk about values.
Yes.
Now, you might be the only person I know that has written down family values on your fridge. On your fridge, is that right?
A long time ago, yes.
A long time ago. They're not still there.
They're still there.
They're still there.
They're frayed at the edges.
Bit crispy, are they?
Yes.
Okay. Obviously, values important for a business. Everyone knows that, but there's a difference between doing a values exercise with your team and then putting them in a box somewhere, maybe making them somewhat visible and actually living and breathing your values.
Yes.
What advice would you give to someone out there that is struggling to make the values that they've identified a reality within their firm?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think core values are extremely important. They formulate your culture, whether it's at home or at work. One of the first things I would try and consider is they're your identity, right? So think of a core set of values, what's important to you, but don't do it by yourself. Do it with your team. Hold a workshop, hold a session, bring them on the journey, decide and debate what values are important, and then come up with a set of 4 or 5. I think having too many means you can't focus, but have a set of 4 or 5. If you've got 5, and let's say, for example, somebody's under stress or they're really busy and they can't remember all 5 values, you don't need 5, stick to 4. Yeah. Think about the number. And then when you've decided those values, put them front and center. So, practically, I stuck on my fridge, I have it on my computer. They're part of the framework, they're part of the meetings, we stay on message, they're part of our website, all our assets. That's one way. You want to bring them to life as well, so they need to be actionable. Again, hire by your values, make decisions by values, do your work by your values, set your day out by your values, constantly bringing that in. I think another thing is really important is that leadership or management teams should be living by those values. So one of our values is to do the right thing, right, Adam? So every day our leadership team does that. They try and do the right thing every day. It's non-negotiable. It sets the tone, sets the weather we talk about, and then people start emulating those values. And it gives you a framework that if you're trying to make a decision and you don't know whether it's the right thing, if one of your values is to work as one, bring it back to that. It helps you frame the decision and make it more easily.
I mean, the amount of board meetings that we've been in where we've been chewing over something, and normally you will ask, right, team, what's the right thing to do here? And it's a signpost. It's a really it's a decision-making tool at the end of the day, isn't it? Yeah, interesting. And any values that you think are fundamental within the business?
Yes, I do. I think doing the right thing is fundamental. Taking opportunities and instilling trust is, and for me, teamwork. yes, we have our own goals, but collaboration, any values around that are very, very important.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, having come from a couple of different organizations where values existed, but I don't necessarily see us living and breathing by them, to here where you've really been the champion internally of values. At the beginning of a town hall, they're there on a slide.
Yes.
There's normally examples by them about where someone in the team has lived and breathed by the values. If we're recognizing somebody, maybe it's the keen player of the week, or
Yes.
somebody's promotion, or a particular project, normally the language is there. The repetition of them is really, really important, isn't it?
Staying on message, bringing it back. Like you said, we'll have meetings and, we'll recognize achievements, but we'll always link it back. Great teamwork, worked as one, did the right thing. It's constant in our messaging.
Yeah. So what other aspects do you think of your role or being an SME business leader do you think would be useful for our listeners to learn more about?
I think goals and standards are quite important. I think having very, very clearly defined goals, objectives that align to the company goals, the team goals, individual goals, company goals, and you're communicating them effectively is really important. But alongside that is having some base standards. So that's your code of conduct. Like, what do you want from a business? Do you want professionalism, responsibility, accountability, fairness? Those two work in tandem, I think. And if you drop one, then the other one drops. I think those two work very well together. SMEs, we touched on before, quality leadership and quality teammates. Again, they work in tandem. You want a quality leader, that kind of hits the mission, but takes the teammates on the journey with them. They use their influence to build trust and positivity. But you need quality teammates too. They're part of the equation. So they need to hold those values. Those goals are really important, and the standards are really important to hold each other to account to achieve those goals. So work really, really well together.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic about centralized versus decentralized goal setting, and something that we've been through a bit of a journey on, haven't we?
Yeah.
And we had our goal setting session for 2025 recently, and there were 16 people in the room, target setting. And we spoke about the method for how we come up with the targets. That was agreed, and then we look at the input metrics, and we look at the kind of balance between ambition and keeping it achievable, and wrestle with it, so that the aim is that you walk out of that session and everyone goes, I understand how this was created and I buy into it, I'm excited by it, and I can go and disseminate my team's contribution to the overall target, which I also understand and buy into and think is achievable.
Yes.
If you can get all of those factors right, you've got a kind of ecosystem of teams where their roles all contribute, and it's almost like a waterfall structure, but it's not created from some artificial figure that's just been plucked from thin air. It's everybody's contributed to it.
Yes.
A real balancing act.
Yes, it is. It's challenging as well, but you're bringing them on the journey. You're explaining the why. You could have a number, for example, and leadership goes, we've got to get to that number, but the team needs to really buy into that. Like, why do we need to get to that number? How do we break it down? How does it work? So that's really important. And from the team target, you can build individual targets. They all align back. The goals all align back, and they can see the linear pattern.
Let's talk about transparency. Last topic. Yeah.
Yes.
How transparent is too transparent? What's the right level of transparency? How do you approach transparency? Give us your take on it. Yeah,
I think I try and bring it back to what my strengths are. I like to lead with empathy. So for me, being as transparent as possible is really important. I want to build the trust. That's my objective. I want to give the appropriate amount of information where I can. I also want to know the person I'm giving that information to, and I'll adapt it. But where possible, I'll be as transparent as possible, explain the why. and give them the details so there's no ambiguity, because I don't want them to walk away from a meeting or one-to-one or a group session going, actually, I don't really understand that. It wasn't really clear. I'm going to kind of make up my own sort of loops from that. So I want to clear the noise. I want to make sure there's no ambiguity, but I want to give them the right level of detail where I can.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's real kind of interesting balance, right? Too much transparency and oversharing, and people can, take that a bit, there can be some scary stuff in there, and under transparency, people feel like they're operating in the dark. There is a really neat kind of sweet spot somewhere. And I guess my advice to people would be to play around with it.
Yeah.
And if you feel like you're not being transparent enough, and some of the indicators of that are that your team are maybe acting in misalignment from the overall strategy, and some of the things that they're giving you feedback wise are going, this feels very disconnected from the reality of what's going on in the business. Ease up the level of transparency until you get to a point where you feel and a level of comfort.
And ask them, do you have any questions? Was it clear? What do you need to know still? It's really important, because I want them to go away thinking, okay, I've got this. Or there's a reason, I've got a trusted decision that's been made because I'm looking at it through the lens of the business. I need to back this. And then they also need to go out there and support the messaging too.
Sage, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I know I've learned a lot. I know our listeners will learn a lot. I think this is probably the most kind of real hands-on episode that we would have had so far. And I think anybody leading a team, building structures, inheriting a team, thinking about COO, managing a COO, putting in place value, there's so much good stuff in there. So we really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Behind the SME. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. It really helps others find the show. If you want to get in touch, you can find our email in the description. Until then, keep building, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.